Hello and welcome to another episode of the CG Garage. This is episode number 372, featuring Barbara Ford Grant, the president of Prysm Stages, and with a lot of great stories. You will notice that I am not joined by Kristen. She is on vacation this week, but she is sorely missed, at least by me, because she does a huge amount for the podcast, and it's really much harder when she's not around. But anyway, let's talk about Barbara. Barbara was an amazing guest. I've known her through our time at Digital Domain together, but she's had an incredible career at DreamWorks Animation and Sony and Digital Domain, Disney, and much more. She talks a lot about a lot of that and some part of her career there. She also had a very interesting time at a company called Meow, which is an interactive art company, which is really, really interesting. She also shares a lot of her time over at HBO, of what her time was like when she was working at HBO, which was really fascinating in a lot of ways. And now what she's doing at Prysm Stages, which is a really, really big virtual production stage facility that she is helping get started. And it looks very, very interesting. Also, she happens to be the new chair of the Sci-Tech Awards, which is really great as part of the Academy, and really great to have her talk a little bit about that. And of course, one of the great things to talk about with Barbara, because of the amazing success she's had, it's really great to see her thoughts on the struggles that certain women may have in the tech industry, especially in visual effects. But anyway, it was really great having her on, and I'm very excited to have her in this podcast. A couple of announcements. As you guys may know, we've announced in the last few weeks, this April is Autism Acceptance Month. And with that, we've actually partnered with our great friends at Exceptional Minds, which is a great school that teaches people on the spectrum virtual video effects skills, animation skills, and other skills of that nature. And it's a really, really great organization that we're really proud to support. And if you guys want to know more about Exceptional Minds, go to exceptional-minds.org and figure out what they're doing there. And what we're going to do at the end of this podcast, at the end of this intro, is we'll show a little sizzle reel of some of the stuff that goes on there. And that will be in the video form of this podcast, not the audio form. And it'll give you a little bit of an insight as to what Exceptional Minds is all about. But then after that, we'll go straight to the podcast with Barbara. Okay, a couple of announcements for us. On May 4th, Chaos will be at FMX 2022. We're going to have a booth there, and we have a talk as well, so you go check it out. It's going to be very exciting. Again, on May 4th is when we'll be there. In terms of products, Chaos Corona 8 is out. Yes, and now it's called Chaos Corona. We're excited about that. And it has lots of new features, including Chaos Scatter, Chaos Cosmos, Corona Decal, and new Corona Slicer. So it will really help you guys out, and check it out on Corona 8. Meantime, if you want to know more about this podcast, you can go to facebook.com/CG Garage Podcast or chaos.com/CG Garage. And if you want to check us out on YouTube, to see the video form, you're more than welcome to do that. Just go to Chaos Group TV. Go to youtube.com/Chaos Group TV. And that's where you'll see all of the Chaos Group videos, including this one. And if you want to have ideas about other podcasts or comments or anything you'd like to communicate with us, just remember you can always email us, labs@chaosgroup.com. And don't forget to leave us a review on Apple Podcast. And that's about it. So, like I said, we will be showing, if you're watching the video form of this, you'll be seeing a sizzle reel from our good friends at Exceptional Minds. And then right after that, we'll go into episode number 372 with Barbara Ford Grant.
At Exceptional Minds, we're very aware of the fact there are too many young adults with autism that are unemployed. There's nothing that these young adults can't do, and they keep proving it time and time again.
My favorite thing about Exceptional Minds, I've been able to grow so much, started seeing more clarity in my art style.
The environment that we're given here is encouraging that creativity, the talent within us.
This was where I was going to get the necessary skills to do what I wanted to do.
It's really important that they understand the finer points of how to work within an office and how to work within a business structure.
I realized my true calling, I need to be an animator. The ultimate goal is to help our students actually work in the entertainment industry and have meaningful careers as artists and technicians.
They're feeling good about what they do and what they can do in the future.
I like film, I like animation, learned more about visual effects, found out that I'm good at it, and now I do it full time.
It has been amazing just discovering what I'm good at. We have answers that we didn't have before, friendships that we didn't have before. The community is very important. I've always felt like an outsider. I feel so much less alone than I used to.
They know that they are making progress towards an achievable goal, not just a job, but a career path.
Some of our graduates have gone on to work for Nickelodeon, Marvel,
Multiple Star Wars films.
A job at Fox and at Sony.
Cartoon Network.
Sesame Street Workshop, being given the opportunity to write and direct for them.
So while people with autism might learn differently, they bring incredible skills to bear. We always say at Exceptional Minds that what makes you different makes you extraordinary.
There are people who do get it and people who just don't get it. Stick with the people who do get it. They're the ones who will help you be your best self.
Welcome to another CG garage where the chaos group talks. You'll know it's over when the last bucket drops. We're gonna fire off rays in high dynamic range. We know that ambient occlusion is passe. Global illumination won't lead you astray. And while image-based lighting is really swell, you need to make sure everything has Fresnel.
Barbara, thank you so much for being on. I'm very excited to talk to you. There's lots of great news, lots of new stuff that's going on in your life and career. I'm very excited to talk about. But I think that, the first time you and I met was when you were at DD. Like, that's when we were talking, right? I think so.
Yes, probably. Yeah, I arrived
around Tron time. Were you there around Tron time?
End of Tron. Yeah.
Okay.
It was the end of Tron, the beginning of G.I. Joe 2 kind of time frame.
Yeah.
I think it was around, I want to say 2011.
Okay. Yeah. And I was going on to Real Steel, and then I did Oblivion after that.
Going on. Yeah. That era. Exactly.
Cool. Well, that's really great.
By the way, it's a real honor. I mean, I've seen the roster.
Well, no, it's a really big deal to have you on, and I'm very excited about this one. So, but I think people need to get a little understanding of your background, like where it started, because you've been to a lot of really important places and had a lot of very interesting roles along the way. So, what got you started in visual effects, or you're interested in visual effects, and how did that all begin?
I was wondering if you're going to ask me that. I think anyone who's been around as long as me has an interesting origin story, because it wasn't an obvious path. Visual effects wasn't a really well-known thing in computer graphics.
Right.
As a job was not a well-known thing at the time. So my journey is probably particularly weird. So I was an art student. Actually, I was a fine art student at the University of New Mexico, and
nice.
Yeah, and I started as a painter and kind of gotten into photography, and then started doing multimedia. And because I had started morphing that into installation work, I was introduced to a professor called Gene Youngblood, who had just started running this program on experimental video, and introduced me to Nam June Paik and Bill Viola and all these interesting people doing things where it became very clear to me that I was interested in art, storytelling, and technology, and the intersection of the three. So I started doing installation work that involved video and a little bit of computer graphics. I had gotten access to an Amiga 1000 and an Amiga toaster through our media center, and started building stuff, and all to kind of create these no place in the real world experiences. There was no Meow Wolf back then. There was no place for this art to go.
Right.
And when I left school, I actually left as part of a whole group of people that I grew up with that were all in bands and part of a music scene. And I came to Los Angeles to work, and I thought experimental film, realizing when I got here, that's not what they did. They made features with 3-act screenplays. And so the rest of the group of friends had moved to San Francisco, and they said, why don't you come up here? I had already been sort of a subscriber of Mondo 2000, was kind of aware of some of the things going on in the Bay Area. So I weaseled my way into a gig I think I was paid in Pepsi's, actually. I'm not even sure I got paid for this, but I was like an intern for Berkeley Systems for a period. And I started doing texture painting, and that led to doing digital matte painting. And I started getting freelance gigs doing digital art for different things. And I did some stuff for repainting star fields for the DVD release of Star Wars, and doing texture painting for Pixar, for Typistry initially, which was a software that never happened.
Right.
And it just happened to be. But one of the things that also happened in that time frame, because I did a number of jobs that involved taking the material on the computer and putting it back to film, like recording. So they had these prototype film recorders at the time. There was the one that I think George Doblov and a couple of people had made at Lucas. And then we used a solitaire cine at the time to film things out. And I noticed that, what was coming out on film really didn't look like the monitor. And this, being an artist coming from a painting background, from a fine art background, it really bothered me. I had lots of conversations with engineers about why that was happening, and discussions about, well, the numbers just work. And that's when I learned about, perceptual rendering and making choices about the things you give away and what you keep. And
Right.
I think in a way, my passion for wanting to have it aesthetically look right led me to forced me to learn how to code and learn how to work with color matrices and do color transforms to get the look that I saw to feel right. Because you had to make compromise, especially back when it was like 8-bit and it was 422 or 4. I mean, these film recorders weren't doing what they do today. And so I actually started doing color management between monitors and film kind of early on. And when DreamWorks popped up, Animation Studio popped up, and they were looking for somebody to do film and color, there were 2 of us. Like I went to the, 3 or 4. We all knew each other. There were very few.
Sure.
So I think that was sort of the big, even though it was so far away from the fine art background I came from, what I realized is here's kind of something interesting, an intersection of all these things that takes my skills. Let's see where it goes. And from there, I went to, I don't know how far down you want me to go into this.
Oh, yeah, all the way.
So I think I might have been like employee 75. It was really early
at DreamWorks.
DreamWorks, yeah, DreamWorks Animation.
And this was after PDI or before PDI?
This was before. So I went from the Bay Area to down LA to work and it was back when I would have been a junior engineer at the time, where I was picked up in a limo, and they do that, everybody they recruited had this rock star experience to recruit in, because it was a new studio and it was,
sure,
early 90s or whenever, or mid 90s, whenever it was. So I was part of the original group that kind of worked on the pipeline, the animation pipeline and the color pipeline, and how we were going to go out to film for DreamWorks Animation, and wound up staying through Prince of Egypt and most of Road to El Dorado.
Okay.
At that point, I got a little bit itchy about doing something creative and different. I did a bunch of, I did a little bit of matte painting. I did a little bit of morphing clouds for the logo. I got to do some dabbling into creative, but I mostly worked on color pipelines, and not being trained in that, I can tell you it was not pretty, I'll be honest. I mean, I did a lot of, it was like Perl libraries wrapped up in T-shell scripts that had a lot of for each in it. It was not pretty, but we got to go from frames to film somehow.
Right.
And I started to get a sort of a love for the all aspects of the pipeline, but I also had an itch to do something creative. So I went back to New York for 3 years, and it's probably not obvious from my CV that I did this, and shot fashion and produced fashion campaigns for mostly, photography. For high-end clients like Chanel and Gucci. And I worked with a lot of fine art artists, Cindy Sherman and Anthony.
Oh my God. I love Cindy Sherman.
Right. So it was fashion's intense. The fine art world's pretty intense. I actually got so exhausted by that 3-year experience that it's I'm going to go back to film because it's more rational. It's more I can have a more control over my life. And at that time, PDI called because they had just gotten involved with DreamWorks, and they'd been involved with DreamWorks. We filmed out Ants for them, but they had just been purchased by DreamWorks.
By DreamWorks. Got it. Yeah.
And we're finishing up Shrek. And so I was originally came in to take Shrek to post and then to work on the post pipeline for them. I wound up staying 6 years, probably the best. Some of my favorite 6 year memories of my career was those 6 years at PDI. It was just like it was small enough where you knew everyone. And I'm sure, the DD people have a similar kind of like, there's this affinity when they talk about the old days. Cause like,
sure.
You know everyone, you watch people grow into who they were going to become in their career. And just an amazing group of people on a couple. And I think one of the other things I think is a really sweet spot for studios is when most everyone's on the same project, right? That camaraderie, the way you kind of band together to make it all happen. And I just happen to have been there through probably one too many Shreks, but I went through the Shrek 2, Shrek 4D, and then a couple of Madagascars. And by the time Shrek the Third came around, I was ready to do something more interesting. But while I was there, and I should say this goes all the way back to, I think, the earliest days of me arriving in San Francisco. I got to do the things I did because no one really knew how to do it, but I happen to have had the gift of having managers and people above me who gave me the latitude to try and figure it out. Like they gave me an opportunity, like, we don't know how we're going to do it. You try. And it made a huge difference because, one of the things that I sort of always gravitate towards is I want to solve problems that haven't been solved before. And I want to solve them in a way that allows other people to do things that they've never done before. And so I'm really driven by that. And that went full force when I got to PDI because I had a lot of latitude. The producers trusted me. Andy Hendrickson was the head of technology at the time. He trusted me implicitly, gave me a team of R&D engineers to start building tools with. And so that's what we did. We built playback systems. We built 3D projection systems. We did a bunch of editorial tools. And then I started getting into previs and performance type things on the side. Because I had done so much work on the post-production and the 3D projection systems for Shrek 4D, when Jeffrey made his proclamation that all movies would be in stereo going forward. I don't know if you remember that famous.
Yeah, I do.
Well, I was at PDI at the time and DreamWorks was, full force behind these stereo movies. And so I was asked if I would be an associate, if I would come on as a producer for Monsters vs. Aliens, which was going to be the first movie that was done fully stereo from start to finish, starting in layout. We had done some stereo layout tools. And I turned that down to go to Sony Pictures Imageworks because I wanted to I saw it as an avenue. They had done Beowulf, they had done Polar Express before that. They'd also done like some amazing, simulation work on Spider-Man, and they had done some, they'd already done the ICT scan for the Doc Ock character, and so it's like, it looks like interesting things are going on over there. I'm going to go over to, and so I had a great opportunity. The guy who hired me, not so coincidentally, the guy who hired me at DreamWorks was then head of technology at Imageworks and brought me in to lead the back end of R&D, which was shading, rendering, simulations, but then we also computer vision, performance capture, virtual production tools that were sort of falling into that space as well. And that was kind of amazing. And it was a great brain trust at the time at Imageworks. We got to do a lot of things, it was sort of the era of Magnus and, so there's a volumetric renderer that was built there. There was OSL and a whole new shading library was being done with Larry Gritz. We had Marcos and Arnold was in the works, and
Tana was just starting up there at that time.
Yeah. So it was a supreme time in visual effects investment in R&D to be at that time. It was well championed. It was well funded. We also had probably not so great from the accounting side of perspectives. We had a big gap. There was a shift after Beowulf, and this sort of a lot of feelings in there. And I'm going to kind of put a pin on the feelings because it wasn't probably handled as well as it could be. But what happened at the end of Beowulf, and there was an enormous amount of people on the back end who did not have a project to roll into. And so we were doing gap mitigation, trying to figure out what to do with folks. And so a lot of those R&D projects that became software inside of Imageworks, and some of them became software as commercial products that are now used across all the studios, happened at a combination of the investment in R&D there and also the utilization of a whole lot of TDs who were on GAP. Like a lot of fluid system, or the flip system came out of GAP effects folks, right?
Interesting.
A lot of the shading library came out of LookDev and shader writers who were just not on a show at the time. So it was just an incredible opportunity of really smart resources to do cool things. So I very much enjoyed that time. And I also realized that I love building tools at scale that outlive a single production. I mean, because it's great to make things for, and I'm going to come back to this as it relates to virtual production too. Right. It's great to make amazing things happen on a show, but when you realize you're making something that's going to change how shows get made down the road, like it's not going to go away at the end of the show. We're going to keep building and iterating against this new way of thinking. That's super exciting.
Yeah.
From Imageworks, I went over to DD. Actually, I took a little bit off to spend with the kiddo. I had I went on maternity leave and wound up staying on maternity leave for like a year and a half. And then I got a call from DD about looking at technology across the shows and considering how could we have a global technology strategy, which, as you know, was full of landmines and politics and mixed feelings. And I said, yes, I'll do that.
Right.
And so I came in initially, I think, under the auspices that I was going to look at the pipeline, and we were going to build a global pipeline, and we are going to try to roll large-scale shows onto it. I think that got a little bit circumvented by the need to work on Jack, the
giant killer,
the giant slayer. I think what is that? They changed the name to Giant Slayer, which
I don't remember yet.
Was an emotional undertaking for a lot of people, but it was also a massive show for DD. And for me, it was a really good opportunity to understand what's actually important. Because I think it's, on the surface, it's like, well, we're going to get economies of scale if everybody's on the same pipeline, right?
Sure.
But the same pipeline is not one size fit alls, and the same render is not one size fit alls. And there's sort of talent is left out of the equation. Right? Like, this is how I work, and this is how I'm able to get this magic that I do because I do it in this way. And so I learned a lot about creating more open frameworks. We tried to, during that DD time, I think one of the initiatives that sort of prototyped that was when we started talking about a digital human pipeline, not just doing digit doubles or doing hero characters for a single show, but how do we build a pipeline for creating digital humans that's going to be a good starting point for whatever show, regardless of what head rig you want to use or what solvers you want to use or what renderer, frankly, you're going to use.
Right.
It's a tough crowd there. So it was good for me. Yeah, I couldn't, I had a little bit of hubris going in. I definitely had my ass handed to me a couple of times during the course of that, because I learned a lot about the passion of why choices are made in the thick of a production and how to kind of try and build enough openness to make that possible.
Well, I definitely think, you had the toughest job at that time because political feelings were strong.
Yeah, you were there.
and some people were like, nope. And some people were like, absolutely. And you had to be in the middle, like, can't we find some compromise? Can't we all just get along? And that's a really hard thing. And people take their renders like religion,
Yeah,
and so
it's Lion's Den for sure, as you know. Yeah. And I have a lot of respect for that. Like, if you got to where you are because of the tools, the way that you know them, to have somebody come in and say, I'm going to take that away because this is better, or this is going to save the company money, that's not enough of an argument.
Right.
It's just not. But I think there's certain things that are always going to have religious wars about them,
Right.
Right. And I think render is one of them.
From the beginning, I think from the very beginning, which is unfortunate, but I know, I work for a company that makes a render, so I know exactly, unfortunately, the minefield that those have.
Yeah, I'm sure that's the relationship that you have, and you guys, you and Vlad and everybody at Chaos, one of the things that was really impressive to me, and I had a similar experience with a different vendor rendering situation at Imageworks, is that you were part of the team. You were
Right.
there, sitting there, working side by side, trying to figure out how to make that work for the project to achieve the goals that they were trying to get to creatively. And that makes all the difference. Part of like the success of a render or any tool in creative process is the relationship to the people who are creating that tool.
Yes, for sure. For sure. Absolutely. Well, that was great. I do remember it was a very hard position for you to be in, but I think, you did very well, all things considered. I'm going to say for sure. Very considered.
Visual effects after that one.
You did. You took off, right? So didn't you,
Sort of.
was that, you went to HBO at that point?
Yeah, I went to HBO, and part of that was, and it felt like a huge leap, and it kind of was. I mean, it was more of a cultural leap than anything else, because it was at a time when HBO, they contacted me, and part of their interest in me, particular, not having come from broadcast, is like, look, we have 40 years of broadcast, but now we have people wanting to shoot Alexas and do visual effects. We're used to flames and a Sony camera, and they had a very specific way that things had been done for a long time, and now it was all going file based, and they wanted to figure out, how do we do this at scale? How do we get economies of scale? How do we make it look as good as feature films? Right. And so it was kind of an exciting time to go in, but how do you do that when we still have an entirely baseband infrastructure? We get tapes delivered, so there was a lot of housekeeping and resetting of the table that had to be done before we can even build towards that goal that they had. So I wound up staying there for 5 years, and it was just incredible how much for an organization has been. HBO did about 30 to 36 shows a year, but a show could be 10 hours of programming. Right, a single show per season. So it was an enormous scale of content being produced at any given time, and just a global footprint for it. So it was an opportunity to work at a different scale than I ever had before, but solving a lot of familiar problems.
Yeah, for sure. It's funny. I just had a conversation with Mallory Yund, and she was in a similar boat. She got into that became her niche, going from tape to file. Like that became something that was very, very important and very interesting.
Yeah. It was a different political field, but when I was the tape killer. I just went workflow by workflow. Sports was last, because I knew they have to do a lot to air. But I went workflow by workflow, killing the tape until we just were completely tapeless.
Yeah. I think the thing that she mentioned, it was strange. I never even thought of it, was the tsunami in Japan wiped out the factory, and that sort of created
out. Yes.
Yeah.
Right. Suddenly there was you might not be able to get those tapes, the HD Cam SR.
Yeah. Yeah, which was
specifically that tape. Everybody,
which is what everyone used.
So I think I was called maybe a couple months after the tsunami.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Okay, well, that's a very interesting. So that process in HBO and dealing with streaming, that must have been an interesting thing. They weren't streaming actually at the time, or they were just
we had streaming. No, we had a HBO Go had started.
HBO Go, that's right.
Actually, but it was it wasn't on demand, but the pipeline to HBO Go was after everything else was fed. We also send it to a CDN that feeds HBO Go. When we went to move to, and this did happen in my time frame, when we were moving to HBO Now, it's like
I remember.
I'm not going to
HBO Go.
There's a whole lot of branding and confusion, logos that are not great, if you ask me. But eventually, we got there's a over the top OTT way, so it's direct to consumer streaming that was intended to be near to live, as close to when we actually deliver to the network as possible, and that required a complete upheaval of the way we did post.
And how was that? Because from what I remember, HBO Go was if you had cable and you had HBO, you could get this as extra. It was like your DVR on demand.
It was a nifty app for basically on
demand. But I didn't necessarily subscribe. I didn't have cable at all.
Yeah.
And I wanted to HBO. It's like, now I can just get HBO on my own. And it's like, this is great. So that must have been kind of a big deal, right?
It was a big deal. It was a big deal, I think, to the consumer, and excited a whole new group of subscribers. It was also a big deal internally when you have a business that is largely operated by people selling content to cable providers.
Right.
right?
Yeah.
That was the business. So it was a
And
change
so now they're not
So-
selling just to cable providers
Yeah, so
anymore.
forget about the infrastructure and the the process of getting content to a new app. I mean, it was an upheaval of the company to really consider. It was a complete redirection of the company, simply
Interesting.
put, and it involved like all aspects of how we did things.
Yeah. I
And
guess
then
that's
the platform.
so they're the ones making decisions. They don't have to pitch anything to the cable providers. They just make the decisions on their own. now,
Yeah,
right?
and so which HBO kind of always has, and I found this super fascinating. And I hope this is still true. I'm not sure it's still true, but when I got to HBO, and it was like the latter end of Mike Lombardo's reign, and Richard Plepler was there, and just an amazing group of individuals Carolyn Strauss, who had built what was HBO, what people knew of HBO from an original programming perspective. And
Sure.
there was definitely, we are the curators kind of
Right.
mantra, right? Like, we don't do audience testing. We don't let Sky and Charter and Viacom, none of these people are going to tell us what our content is. We're just going to negotiate how much they're going to pay for it because we already know they're going to want it. And
Right.
internally, that curation process was enviable. It was intense. They invested well. They brought in incredible talent into the stable at all levels, like from well-established, well-known to we're going to try these kids that we saw something on YouTube that we really resonated with, comics too, and they took great risks, and they were willing to kill it at any point in the process as well. Like anywhere from the development deal to we've already got a pilot or we've got a season in a can, they were willing to walk away from something if it wasn't good, which is I think why they had that golden moniker for so long, is they just didn't put shit out, right? Like they definitely would, and I'm sorry if I'm cursing and that's not
That's okay. I've had Tim Miller on, so that's fine.
Okay. All right, I'm mild compared.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so I think it's a little different now as Warner Media and as different players have come in, with AT&T coming in and then exiting stage left, and Discovery
Right.
now. I think there's probably more chefs in that creative curation mix, but that was one of
But there was also those were the years when Game of Thrones was coming out, right? So when
Yeah, so I
HBO
was
was
there.
a golden child.
Right. I actually feel very, very lucky that I seem to have been at the right place during the golden time.
Right.
On a lot of
Yeah.
occasions. Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah. And then
Okay. So you said you were at HBO for what, about 5 years?
for 5 years. Yeah.
Okay.
And then I left just shy of the AT&T acquisition, but I mean, whether I would have left because of that or not is kind of don't have to answer. But
Sure.
I left for personal reasons. I had a very significant unfortunate event happen in my family, and decided to take time off again. So we moved back to the West Coast. So it was a little bittersweet for me. I had an amazing experience at HBO for the time that I was there. And it was, I think, again, it was like early days of Game of Thrones until AT&T. It was like, I couldn't have bookended it better. It was just a great experience. And then decided to come back to LA. This is home base for me. I absolutely
Sure.
love the LA and the industry that's here, and just the energy among like technologists and storytellers here. So it's good to
Right.
be.
Okay. All right. So you took a little time off, but you started to get back into it after a while, right? So
A little time off never lasts long for me. Yeah.
No, it doesn't sound like it.
I had a conversation. I think I had been back like a year and taken a year off. And then I had a conversation with Victoria Alonso, who's always great to talk to when you're not sure what you're going to do. And wound up doing a bit of consulting. It turned into about 8 months of consulting for Disney Studios. So working with Jamie Boris and Eddie Drake and a bunch of great people over at Disney Studios, Studio Labs folks as well, to look at their innovation portfolio, which, was exciting enough.
Was it part of Disney Research?
So
Or-
it included Disney Research, anywhere that they were doing R&D and innovation, and kind of looking at where it was happening, what things were coming out of there, how it aligned with the work that they were creating and the access to it. And most importantly, this is kind of a challenge with large studios. I think it's a challenge, small and large. When you do research level R&D, how do you transfer? How does that tech get transferred into a practical aspect of being used on shows, being used on more than one show? I think it's a challenge that we all have. And so it's kind of looking at, they invest quite a lot in R&D and research. And so it was a great portfolio to look at, and they were doing amazing things with it, but it was just looking at how to further optimize how they were going about it, which was a lot of fun for me to be like, I knew bits and pieces of things they were doing, but it was nice to kind of look at it on whole and be able to help them a little bit.
Yeah, I was lucky enough. I actually got to visit Disney Research in Zurich, which was amazing.
Great, amazing team. Marcus Gross has done an incredible job assembling talent there, and the relationship with the university.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was really, really cool. So I guess, let's see. So Disney Innovation, was Steve Shapiro at Disney Innovation at that time?
Yeah. He was up until weeks ago when he took the amazing job, the first CTO ever at Aardman Animation.
I just saw that announcement today on LinkedIn. So good for him.
I love Steve. So Steve was a TD and working on stereo stuff at Imageworks when I first got there. So we have kind of a long history together. And then I brought him over to Digital Domain, if you remember.
Yes, I do. Yeah. And he was doing big pipeline stuff there as well.
Yeah, so
I remember that for sure.
Continue to grow.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely.
Absolutely. And actually, I think he probably took on the bulk of what I had put into that effort.
Right.
Ownership of that effort.
For sure.
And so from there, while I was doing that work, I got contacted by Jim Ward, who used to run LucasArts, who was then running Meow Wolf.
Oh, interesting. Okay, so yes, tell us about Meow Wolf.
That was amazing. I mean, of all the cool stuff you get called to do, I mean, it was a roller coaster of a ride, but it was so cool because it also brought back all these memories. Like, I came from New Mexico. I studied fine art in New Mexico. I did installation art as a student. Right. And then this Santa Fe based company is doing this at scale. Like, they're building this, like a believable economic model around these location based experiences that are made by all these installation artists. It was just like such an exciting thing to go back to. So I spent a year with Meow Wolf, and I came in, I'm going to say I guess it was the fall. It was like the beginning, midway through the first year of the pandemic, right? So they were shut down in Santa Fe, had no cash coming in. They were restructuring to be able to adjust to those changes, not knowing when they'd be able to open that one. And they had a roadmap to build and open 2 more that next year. And so I came in.
Can you explain, it's just for the audience, to explain a little bit about what Meow Wolf is and what they may not know?
That is a universal problem. Okay. What is Meow Wolf? There's a documentary, but still don't think they answer. The best I can describe it is it was a collection of artists in Santa Fe who had started creating environments that people wanted to experience. And they got bigger and bigger. Initially, they were in the museum and gallery space. And then they finally, at a certain point, George R. R. Martin invested in a bowling alley so they could build it at a scale of a really, I think it was 30,000 square foot location-based experience. And it's so unique because it involves everyone's different perspective and voice. When we think about location-based experiences, they're often driven with a really specific, whether it's the creative director or the production designer, there's usually a few sort of point of views that holistically create an experience. And when you go into the Santa Fe location of Meow Wolf in particular, you're going to see 1,000 hands. You're going to smell the glue gun. You're going to see all the different artists' point of view. And what they did, that's sort of part of the magic of it, and it feels very multiverse-y, is they do this thing called frosting to connect it all. So the connected worlds are really the connection of almost all these different artistic consciousnesses. Consciously, I don't know, is that a plural? The way that they've gone about creating these connections is they've invented this whole Meow Wolf narrative experience. So there's all this world building with characters and narrative threads and universes that are interconnected. And even between the different locations, there's threads of connection. And so if I were to describe what Meow Wolf is, it's kind of a punk rock, multi-dimensional, multimedia, metaversy, tactile artist experience.
Right. But it's also well rooted in the physical world as well in some ways.
Yeah, it's physically based, but there's that's always so there. Yeah, I should say that. Although I think that will change over time.
Yeah, probably.
Unless something really changes. There's many layers to it. There's a location you can go to. There's a gamification layer to those locations, and then there's sort of a metaverse layer to connecting those locations.
Right.
Yeah. But it's physical. You're right.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Well, that's for, so you started
those locations.
Yeah. Yep.
Well,
so you started in the middle of the pandemic, right? Or right around that time.
Yeah. And at the time when I got there, I mean, they were in the middle of just like ripping out the Best Buy routers they had bought for the network and talking about building sort of an enterprise level, message bus and operating system and sort of like all the aspects you need to run a business, like the, point of sales and tracking customers and the CRM. And then also what they had been architecting for quite some time before I got in there, their experience operating system, which connects the experiences to like IoT and to real-time projection. And so there's like Arduinos and there's Touch Designer and Unreal and all these things that are in the different locations. What I should say is they all operate as a single organism. So technically they're all wired together to operate as a single organism where you're doing something, your cause and effect can have another effect within that entire space. And we opened Las Vegas in February last year and then Denver in September. So that was a lot for my 1 year in Meow, but it was a great experience. And it felt really good to watch both those locations open and actually be open during COVID and be very, very successful.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, that's great. That's great. Now you've started something new, right? You've started doing another thing just more recently.
So at the same time that and Jim Ward knows this, so I can say this out loud and publicly. At the same time, I had been chatting with different people, Cliff Plumer being one of them, about virtual production. I've always kind of had a passion for that intersection. Like what I love about virtual production is it's bringing people back to a real-time collaborative experience. You're looking and talking about the same things in real time. So I've been trying to figure out where it was going as a business. And because virtual production for me historically had always been we pop it up for a show and we pull it back down. It hadn't been, it was front-ending other visual effects work. It wasn't really its own thing. And we're still trying to figure out, like, is this something that we continue on and we can build tools that we can iterate on, again, like to be able to do this at scale. And Cliff in particular was very interested in figuring out, Cliff Plumer, who long history in visual effects, had been looking at trying to figure out an economic model that would work for standing up a virtual production business that was less about the specifics of a single group of creatives or a single visual effects house or even a single movie or studio, but really about creating a framework where people could come and create work, regardless of where, whoever's pre-vising it or tech vising and whoever's doing any post visual effects work, or if you want to shoot this camera, that camera, if you want to use Unreal or something else, like how do we create a virtual production framework that people can use that's at a scale and an interoperability that makes sense economically as a business. And he had been doing a lot of work while I was busy playing with Arduinos and Touch Designer. Right. And had made some traction and had put together already a couple of companies, Halon and Lux Machina, which is an extraordinary consulting company. Built a lot of the volumes for a lot of different people already, including the Mandalorian one, the Leadston, and started working towards that goal. And at a certain point, they were looking for funding, and NEP came along and said, I just want one of those. Large, owned by NEP's wholly owned by the Carlyle Groups, just for
right.
Phil
Which is
visited.
part of Foundry, or was part of Foundry.
The Foundry
right.
was
Right.
that was part of their portfolio at one point, disguised as part of their portfolio. So they've been in the M&E space for a long time. They're particularly interested in this area, and so it made sense to them, rather than building up like here's a situation where we can kind of hit the ground running, because NEP had already been spending they've been in broadcast for a very long time. They've been doing live events for quite some time, and in both areas, in particular live events, they were already moving towards a lot of XR and virtual work anyway. They were doing process work. They were building large LED walls for different things. They were, doing virtual environments and doing in-camera VFX. So this was they saw this as a logical extension of the business that they were trying to go into anyway. And so when they did the acquisition and they were looking for somebody to run the Prysm Stages, to build and run the Prysm Stages business, I said, yeah, of course.
Yeah. Well, that's very exciting. Well, so so what is the Prysm Stages? I've seen the site a little bit, but people may want to know what's about.
Yeah. So within virtual studios, what NEP's calling virtual studios, there's virtual art department, and there's previs virtual art department cinematics, which is largely like the Halon, pre-existing Halon business. We're now extending what is that to be more inclusive of feature film and series work. And then there's the volume itself, like the design. One of the things that I think that Lux does exceptionally well is designing volumes, purpose-built volumes that are built for permanent installation to do a variety of different things, like to be versatile enough to do a lot of things. And so those two businesses still operate under virtual studios for us. So there's the creative services, the production services, and volume design and operating the volumes. Prysm Stages are our own designed and operated and staffed and run stages. And Trilith is the first sort of flagship version of that, and that opens in May.
Okay.
It's incredible. It's beautiful. Like Trilith itself, Frank Patterson and the team at Trilith have done an incredible job of transforming what was Pinewood into this incredible, like, creative community experience. There's a flower shop, for God's sakes. T-Town is like got everything you need. And so we're like the anchor tenant in what they're calling their creative technology footprint. So this is the first stage. I expect there'll probably be others in the future. It's roughly like 95 by 85 foot by 35 foot volume. So it's a very large volume.
Very large.
It's a very large volume. Full tracking system, amazing coverage for tracking. What can I tell you about it? It's got a whole bunch of super cool design. I probably get in trouble to tell you. It opens in May, and we're going to start showing us about it. But there are some amazing ingenuity that has gone into making it even more versatile to be able to do things in a practical way, to integrate practical in with that volume stage. Because one of the challenges, how do you get a techno crane in there? How do you move a jib around? And how do you use practical lights with the ball lights and things like that?
Right.
So, and how do you get access to things, right? When it's 35 feet tall.
Sure.
So solving a lot of those sort of problems. And we're going to start showing demos in May.
Yeah, it was very. I've had the privilege of being inside an LED volume, and it's really kind of an amazing experience to see what that looks like and how that works. But I've been fascinated with virtual production, ever since I started at Chaos. I started on a project where I started looking at it, and I just think it's like the thing that I love the most is bringing the power of visual effects and computer graphics directly to the DPs and the directors.
That's exactly right. Directly to the people who are used to practical tools to be able.
Before they were just like handing off this stuff into this black box and like hopefully it looks good when it comes out.
Maybe in 6 months. I always use the Alice in Wonderland example. So when we did Alice in Wonderland, and we were roughly tracking things back then.
Right.
We were tracking solvers, but it was green screen, and you're doing all this work and you're collecting all this data. It was literally 6 months before you were going to see a composite of what actually happened, like what came together that day. It's just amazing to watch people see this thing and to be able to react to it and make creative decisions in real time on the stage.
Yeah.
And
yeah,
I think
that's
have done some incredible job. Like for those who are not really comfortable using an iPad or using a computer, like to create tactical tools to help make that transition make sense to what they're seeing as well.
Yeah, I'm hoping this is going to bring new respect for visual effects and CGI to a thing, and then I'm going to transition to the Academy in a second.
Yeah,
but because there was a dark time in my mind during during the Life of Pi days, right, when things were really bad, and there was a very big disrespect for the amount of work that visual effects did from the rest of Hollywood. And I think that's not necessarily their fault. They just didn't understand how much work and how much we did.
Right. I mean, they see what happens in the end. They see the composite and they make a decision against it. They don't see all the work that went into that. I don't know that it's going to completely solve it, but I think one of the interesting things that's happening, because the studios see the value and the efficiency of working on a volume, is that they have to think about solving things that they would fix in post or leave it to VFX to deal with. They're having to solve in pre-production. They're having to plan for. And I think as sort of metaversey needs come into play, like if you're there's obviously certain entities that are going to want to make things that are not just a movie or a series that may be going to game or in other platforms. And so thinking about when they build the assets and how the assets are going to get used, that becomes a pre-production problem as well. So they're going to get a lot more visibility into the work that goes into visual effects because we're changing where we're doing it.
Yeah, for sure. I'm very excited about that, by the way. I've been talking, everyone is, which is great. But I think you're absolutely right. I think that, suddenly the real-time aspect is allowing filmmakers to be filmmakers again. And as opposed to, we'll hand it to some guy, and hopefully he knows kind of how to make that look. You know what I mean? And it's like, that's not really the right move.
Yeah, and you also get spontaneity back, right? Because the simultaneity of going through the creative process together, it triggers things that's just not going to happen if you're doing, your weekly review of things out of lighting.
Right. Yeah. So I think that's really exciting. That's the thing that I'm looking forward to the most. And the more that real-time experience starts to get closer and closer and closer to, what you're seeing on the final frame, and then suddenly you are filmmaking again in a lot of ways. And I think that's really cool. Well, cool. So, okay. So we're very excited to see what's going on at Prysm Stages. And so obviously there'll be some announcement in May, which is not far from now. So hopefully this podcast may come out like soon after that.
Oh, okay. So one opening in May, and then there'll be others, obviously.
Okay.
Yes.
Obviously. Great. All right. So that's really exciting to see what's going on there. Now let's talk, there's another announcement I think Darren told me about, that you're going to be part of the Academy. You have a new role at the Academy. Is that true? Are you going to be working with the Sci-Tech committee or something?
So I've actually, I don't know if this is well known, I've been on the Sci-Tech committee for 15 years.
Yes, I do know that.
Yeah, so I was originally the first woman added to the digital imaging technology subcommittee. Mm-hmm. And sadly, it took many years to get any other women on there, but now there are several.
Okay, good.
And then this year I became chair of the main committee. So
nice.
Yeah. First woman ever. But,
first woman ever. Well, that's a really great announcement. I think that's amazing.
Yeah,
that doing
so
that.
I'm pretty excited. And it's going to be an incredible year for the areas of technology we're looking at. Yeah, so we're actually just launching investigations now. The similar tech submissions call ended last week, and now we're looking through what we have, which is quite a lot. We got like 13 areas of technology we're looking at. Yeah. So, and that will culminate in awards, hopefully some awards this fall.
That's awesome. That's really
Yes,
exciting.
yes, you know it all too well. I remember
Yeah, I do. Yeah. In fact, Darren was very good at telling us what we need to do to apply for that. So we got,
Ben is one of those people. So he's been on Sci-Tech, I think, for at least a few years longer than me.
Right.
He's definitely one of those people who've helped lifted others along with him. So I'll call him out for that.
For sure. Well, I think you did bring up, you were one of the first women to be in the Academy, and obviously the role of women is changing in visual effects. I think you're seeing more and more. I don't think it's changing fast enough.
I think I think sometimes we confuse talking about it with changing.
Because I'm looking at all the Oscar nominees right now for visual effects. There's no woman at all in all of that. Is there? There's like 15 people.
Also was just thanks to Brooke Bowles. So Brooke Bowles works in the Academy, and she's been working with Sci-Tech for many, many years. So she's been very helpful in looping me into a lot of different conversations. And one that she just got me in recently, Brooke Brenton is, I believe, and she might be leading it with somebody else, but it's definitely Brooke, that it's a task force, women in visual effects and animation, to actually change those numbers. Because as you described, like, we're not seeing any women in the nominations at all. And on
the leadership side of things.
Yeah. And I wouldn't let VES off the hook either, because it's not much better. So there's definitely a challenge there. I feel very fortunate in that I think I came in under the radar through a side door that allowed me to go up through the ranks in a way, because possibly because of where my interests in technology were. There weren't a lot of people yet. But I can't imagine how I would come in now, because the level of competition involved, if you don't get a hand, if the industry is not supporting you doing that. And I think there's definitely work for us to do. And like I said, I do think it is changing. There's definitely a lot of, one change is that there's a lot more conversation about it, right? And there's funding towards initiatives meant to address that. I think another way that we can all help is lifting, like looking for opportunities, because there's two things that happen. There's one, to get people in the door, right? To ensure that we're being inclusive enough and we're getting people in the door. The next is to get them a seat at the table, right? If they want to go into leadership, get them a seat at the table. The next is to make sure they know they need to speak. If they're sitting at the table, they have to speak up, right? Because that's the point of being at the table in the first place. But then the other thing that seems to happen is, this is a tough business, and the further up in the ranks you go, the more it thins out. Women don't tend to we sort of, I don't want to say we plateau, but we've flattened quite a bit at middle management. And it's hard to get women up into the higher ranks. And I think that's an area to address as well. Getting people in the door and then getting women into the higher ranks is another area that I'm particularly interested in figuring out. How do we ensure that we're lifting people, and we're creating environments where, I have a special needs kiddo. There's a bit of juggling that has to happen. And I'm very upfront with anybody who's going to hire me that's part of the deal.
Well, yeah, but they'd be missing out on all your talent if they didn't take that opportunity. So
but having a confidence to have that conversation is not always so easy for people, and feeling like that they can do that, because they may, if you look around, you're not seeing a ton of working moms. I mean, I'll call Victoria out. She's also a working mom. But I think we need to make that clear that people are doing that and people are supporting it. You can ask for it too.
Yeah. My wife is a working mom and a very successful flame artist doing a special branch of beauty work.
I mean, they keep it in late for that.
And ever since the pandemic, we got the flame. I like to joke is that we have the old flame in the bedroom, but it's she works there and she's doing really well. And I think that flexibility of allowing her to stay home has made a huge difference. Honestly speaking, the pandemic, I think, has changed the game for a lot of people in terms of their lifestyle.
Yeah, I know. I talked to a lot of folks at all different levels about return to work is not what you think it's going to be.
No. Because I think the other thing we prove, especially,
you're relying on, you're going to have to be creative, and you're also going to have to be flexible about the way they want to work.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But I think the big thing that we proved, because we had to prove it, is that all of these things, like you have to be in the facility because of all these security reasons, well, that all went out the door when the pandemic
Totally
happened.
out the door. Yeah, people on the public internet.
Yeah. Yep.
I hope MPA
And nothing
is not listening, but they know there's going to have to be a certain amount of concessions. And I think we were starting to do, just by the nature of Game of Thrones and how it was being, how the production was being done, we were already creating kind of like four-walled personal environments for people to work remotely. And you knew it was sort of like a select conversation. Right? I'm sure every studio had the handful of people, well, we need to make sure this person can do that work from remote because this is their circumstances. And then with COVID, it just all those technologies that we were sort of testing for those, like that one editor, that one director, just became everyone's thing. Like that stack started, like remote graphics, Teradich, like we're going to throw this in for everyone. And I think it's interesting your point about like the security sort of went out the window, and then it came back a little like, okay, what's the minimum viable work situation for artists? I think creative conversations too, like, oh, we need to have everyone in the screening room all together in order to have that conversation. You know, that, like, or we need to be able to make sure that everyone is seeing it at scale and full resolution. And like, we've kind of backed away from that to a large extent as well. It's like, okay, when does it actually matter to do these sort of things?
Yeah, I do remember like sitting 2 hours in a screening room when I could have been doing work. You remember? Like those
where everyone has to be, you're not even looking, you're waiting for your name, your shot to come up, you're doing your email, you're running vendors in the background.
Right. But you're not, it's like, so much, there's definitely efficiencies could be done. I'm actually, the other thing that I think is fascinating, I'm sort of going to go back a little bit to virtual production, is the other thing I think is fascinating is, you know, you worked on big pipelines and you knew what pipelines were, and pipelines were very waterfally. Right? They were like, you couldn't do anything until the next person finished their job, and then you had to kick it back, and it took forever to come back to you. And it was these long things. But I think with virtual production, it's becoming way more agile and way more efficient.
Yeah, we definitely have an opportunity to really streamline things. Yeah, like I think when I started with pipelines, it was a dirty word, first of all, and it was a bunch of, like, it was a combination of Perl and shell scripts and, you know, it was just kind of a hot mess. And it was a way to string departments' assets together, right? Like we desperately need to figure out how to get effects stuff back into animation and And what I love about virtual production, to a large extent, I guess it depends where it is in the process, in the production workflow, but for in-camera VFX, and even for stuff, if you're going to have to turn it over with the OCFs and some data elements, if you're going to have to do things in post, it's largely streamlined in that it all has to get into the engine at some point, right? And so there's a meeting point for all this stuff, and there's only so much footprint it can handle. There's only so many file types it can. So it's a great normalizer in some ways, and it helps us to really streamline the process. But it's also a way that, regardless of what you're doing, a lot of people are working anyway. And people are using real-time engine to do animation, to do layout, to do previews, like they're in the engine anyway for doing all these other things. So it's a nice democratizing tool.
It is. And like I was, when I was telling you, when I first sort of got fascinated with virtual production, Motion Builder was the only kind of like game in town to do anything.
The first data integrator.
Right. So that was the only thing that you could work on, and it was, obviously limiting. And the biggest problem people had with Motion Builder is that it never really looked good, right? So they were trying to figure out how to work that out. And so that's when we started integrating real-time ray tracing with Motion Builder, and I was like, oh my God, it's going to look like a movie while we're shooting it. So it was kind of the thing I got excited. And then when the game engines came along, it's like that is the hub, right? That's the hub of where everything you can experience, and it becomes sort of really an interesting thing that you can do so many different things in that area.
I love to use the word hub. It was kind of a word that we're circling around, is because it allows all those different disciplines to come together and see, not only contribute their pieces to it, but actually see it all out in an integrated form. Like the hub brings it all together so that you can make those, like you can do your creative work.
Right. Yeah, which is really kind of cool. And that's the thing, like I had this thing. It's like, no, dude, you're going to have focus pullers on set again. You're going to have, all these different people.
And there are people who have integrated focus pullers in virtual production environments.
Yep. Yeah. And I think that's great because, a focus puller can make a focus pull look much more cinematic than automatic, stuff. So
and that's, maybe that's what you were getting back to earlier, this idea that we're going to have this integrated visual effects experience that's still the cinematic creation experience.
Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
Super exciting. So
I've been talking to Ben Grossman at Magnopus about this for years.
To Ben.
No, he's he's literally like trying to build an actual fake crane that has the weight of a crane, just so it has the experience of.
I don't think there's anyone who understands that I know that understands that better, the tactile aspects of filmmaking and how to translate that in a virtual real-time world.
Yeah, you can't just move the camera in Maya and it's not the same deal.
No, there's a weight to it. There's some stickiness to it. Yeah.
Yep, for sure. Yeah. For sure. Well, listen, this has been amazing. There's obviously going to be a lot more things to talk to you about, so we're definitely going to have you back on when you have more things. But I'm excited about Prysms, and congratulations on your new post at the Sci-Tech Committee. So it's lots of great announcements, and it's an absolute pleasure having you on.
It's been a pleasure for me. I love talking these things, and Chris, you're a wonderful host. I really appreciate you having me on.